Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons, your 1.5 times favorite podcast in the Northwest and Central Western New York area. I'm Shawn Merwin, here with my effervescent co-host Teos Abadia. What's a sparkling, Teos?
Ooh, my back. My back can tell you that I have done a lot
Ooh.
of Christmas work. I cut down a tree, I hauled it, I put it in the house. I decorated. I mean, not alone. These things all involve family members. It was lovely. Yeah, and I've already watched one holiday movie, so I'm just it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas, Shawn.
Is it? Okay, I will take your word for it. We did have a snowfall here, and it's all melted, and now it's back up to 50 degrees.
It's a
But
miracle, a
I'm sure
Christmas miracle.
it's a yes, global warming is a Christmas miracle. Great.
Merry Christmas, everyone!
Uh,
We
but
got you global warming.
but you know what was pretty, you know what did seem to be pretty amazing and miraculous
I
was
want to
was
know.
PAX Unplugged. I heard so much good news coming out of PAX Unplugged. I have FOMO, which was fear
FOMO?
of having missed out.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
fear of having missed out. Uh,
Yeah.
because just so much news there, which we will cover, and then people having a great time and sharing their photos. And I
Yeah.
have to give a shout out to two folks, Eric Mengi and Jose
Mhm.
Ortiz.
Yeah.
Uh, when Dave Christ asked Eric and I to write the epic for Planescape that premiered there, I did what I normally do. Is I was like, okay, it's got to be an epic. So what are we gonna do? Now I'm like working on the words of it. That's where my
Mhm.
mind went. And Eric went, we need a life-size puppet of the Lady of Pain. And I'm like, sure, yeah, right, okay, whatever. Yeah, life-size puppet. I'm sure we'll be getting that. And like 48 hours later, Eric has a sketch and he's got a prototype going. I was like, wait a second. And he's like, oh, yeah, I know Jose Ortiz. Jose is going to set us up. And if you were
Yeah.
at PAX and playing the Epic, or if you just saw the photos online, this was like a Broadway worthy puppet suit of a like 10 or 12 foot tall Lady of Pain that someone could get inside and move around. And
Incredible.
Eric is amazing. Eric is a genius.
Yep.
Eric, I wish I had 1/10 of the like creative
Yeah.
genius that Eric has, because I have to do it iteratively. And I finally, after many, many times, realize something's a good idea. Eric's just like, oh no, this is what we need, and this is what we're gonna do, and it's done. And
Yeah, I love
Jose's
Eric.
you know, mastery of those props and that stuff, just totally unbelievable. And if you go to Winter Fantasy and play the epic there, you will get a chance to see it as well. So
Oh, I'm
hopefully
excited.
more people will get a chance to see this bit of thing. But if this was the first time I was ever going to a convention, I'm like, oh,
Oh,
maybe I'll play this epic that they were talking about. Oh, it could be cool. That would have just blown my mind. I would
mhm.
have thought this is the most amazing thing ever.
Well, on my end, my FOMO was that I'm just exchanging messages with a bunch of buddies in high school, and one of them's like, "Well, I'm at PAX Unplugged, and I'm playing, the Walking Dead RPG, and I'm playing these board games," and I'm like, "Wait, what?" And he is a gamer,
Yeah.
like I played D&D with him back in the days, but it's like, oh, you just went, like, because maybe if he'd gone, I would have been convinced to somehow hop on a plane. Maybe not, but it would have been that much closer. I had no idea, and he was just there. So maybe next year I'll have to be there, and Christoph and I can play. But as it was, he was just sharing all the awesome things he was doing. It sounded super fun. And I
Yeah.
don't know if you saw the pictures of Chris Perkins and the Act Inc. group, but Chris Perkins looking like Morden Kanan. I had to say, wait, who's that guy? I'm like, oh, that's Chris Perkins.
Yeah.
It was really amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of stuff that we will talk about in the news. But first, since we have so many dedicated listeners who reach out to us with questions and comments, we want to get quickly to our listener corner, where we will start with Matthew Snow. ZJ1CU via YouTube.
Oh, that's a classic droid.
Congratulations to Shawn on release. It is. It is one of my favorites. Uh, on the release of Peril in Pinebrook, you and your team presented a very unique distillation of the D&D experience. Thank you, Matthew. Uh, Following on that discussion about character creation and progression, adding layers of mechanical complexity to the play experience, what are your thoughts on systems with concise character generation and level up mechanics like Shadow Dark, which has random tables with pre-specified improvements, and Dragonbane, which has random rolls for skill improvement and self-contained feats achieved less frequently? Do you think these types of progression are sufficiently robust for the general RPG, TTRPG audience, or is optimization and tinkering a large enough part of the player base that these types of systems are more targeted in appeal? Whew, an incredible question, very intuitive, because I think there is room in the industry for all kinds of TTRPG systems. I think you can have, I think you can delineate many axes, many axes of simplicity and complexity with elements. So you can have character creation as one axis. You can have leveling up or level up mechanics as a second axis. You could have gameplay or even different parts of gameplay as a third axis. You could have the narrative mechanical interaction as a fourth axis, and you can have levels of complexity within all of those different things, and you would appeal to someone at that point. Let's envision a game where there's low complexity in all aspects of the game. You can create a character in 2 minutes and gameplay is super streamlined, leveling simple, or even non-existent. You are going to find people who would like that game. Will it be their favorite game? Maybe not. Will it be the game they play all the time? Maybe not. But you probably have an audience there. Now let's talk about a game where character creation is non-existent. Maybe everybody starts with the exact same, mechanically, the exact same character. No initial building of the character whatsoever. However, through gameplay, there's a complex set of decisions that you make that build your character and differentiate it. That's another kind of system that someone might get into. But since you can't pre-plan your character, it wouldn't appeal to that set of people. We could envision a game where character creation takes 4 hours, but gameplay is quite simple. That would appeal to a certain type of player. So that question then comes back to, what do you mean by sufficiently robust for the general TTRPG audience? If you have that market information, I will pay you for it. Please let me know. What do you think, Teos?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, these types of examples like Shadow Dark and Dragonbane, they're doing what you generally should do as a designer, right? Which is they are matching character creation, character generation to the game itself, right? Shadow Dark is a more deadly game, and it's about dungeon delving, and it's about running out of things and including your hit points, sometimes very quickly. Therefore, having an extremely complicated way to create your character, while that may appeal to some, then they're going to hit the wall of, and 5 feet into the dungeon, my character died. This is totally terrible. And Mike Shea's had a fun account recently on his videos of his Shadow Dark campaign, and the things that are happening because of the fact that they're playing Shadow Dark and because of the characters dying. Things like the plot completely changes all of a sudden because you realize everybody who had a particular goal in mind died. So maybe we don't have that goal anymore, just things like that. And so character generation is one of those pieces. The more you can match it to the type of game, the better it is, right? So Blade Runner has a particular approach that hinges on certain things because of the type of game it is. And I agree with you totally, Shawn, that D&D sort of is in this weird place where it has to be a certain way out of nostalgia, out of player expectations, and it sort of has to be as appealing as it can be to as many people as possible. So it can't be that simple. You could easily have an offshoot game, right? Like a basic set or what you just finished creating, where you can make it much simpler for that particular experience. but the general D&D wants to be more robust. How robust? I mean, we've seen a variety of changes over the years, right, which reflect where the industry is and the expectations of the player base. But it's clear that people, if you took out all crunch, you'd have a problem. And if you went ultra crunchy, you sometimes get it. We've seen some problems there too.
Yeah. And that's why it's important that we have third parties out there making not only their own versions of 5e, their own versions of D&D, but
Yeah.
completely different games that meet a completely different need, tell a completely different story. We used to joke about Fate that the most fun of a Fate campaign is that first session where you create your characters together, come up with your traits, I forgot what aspects, come up with your aspects, build this, you're almost building the world and the relationship between your characters. And then gameplay sometimes was anticlimactic because you were doing all of this stuff and then the gameplay sort of doesn't meet that expectation that you've just creatively done all this work on your character and on your party. So it can work in different directions, and you just, as Teos said, you need to be aware of what your game does and the experiences that the game is supposed to create, and have these other aspects of it not just work with it but enhance it.
Yeah. And I think that, if the question here is looking at should D&D change, I mean, D&D always changes, so it will. It will necessarily change. It unavoidably so. Good luck trying to prevent that. But, we might be a little surprised. I'm sure, certainly a little surprised that if even looking at 2024, it does not seem to continue the momentum of 2014, which I think one of the sweet spots of 2014 was that it managed to do a really good job of appealing to people who wanted a fair bit of crunch, who maybe played 3E, for example, and also give you the kind of story lightness, easy to jump in that both 4E and earlier editions had. And I think that we're seeing it get a little crunchier, which is maybe different than what the rest of the industry is doing. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And maybe it course corrects after that. Maybe 6E will be a far simpler one, or maybe it won't. Who knows, right? It'll be interesting to see how it goes. But I think that with D&D, it's always hard. You always end up where you can't entirely change things out to some super light system. That would leave too many people unhappy. And we have trouble even leaving the ability scores behind, right?
Yeah, that's true. So I had something I was going to say pithy in summary here, but I completely lost it. But give us your thoughts, whether it's on social media or on our Discord or YouTube or wherever you watch or listen to our stuff. Let us know what you think, because a lot of it is what do the fans want, and that changes over time as well. As you gain new players or you lose some players, what people want will shift, and trying to please everyone is impossible. Sometimes trying to please one person's impossible. So that's something that you always have to keep in mind as you design your games.
And maybe, Shawn, I'll add here that whole concept of how the creation must fit the rest of the game, sort of that's the secret sauce, right? And a person might pick up D&D and say, well, this is less or more crunchy than I want it to be. But, oh, look, when I play the whole game, this works for me. And if enough people feel that way, then it's a great, successful game. What you don't want is that mismatch, right? That you come in saying, oh, I'm so excited to play a super crunchy game. Oh, look, the rest of the game, when I actually play, it doesn't feel that way. Or the opposite, right? I want to have a real story-rich experience, but I keep on having to worry about my modifiers, right? And then those things are at odds, then it really suffers. A game can be more or less crunchy than you might want it to be, but when the whole experience plays out, then we end up happy. Right?
Mm-hmm. Our next question comes from George PR via Mastodon. Would you consider talking about the process from vision to publishing a whole setting like Aurora on the Eldritch Lorecast or a Mastering D&D podcast? Yes. Yes, we would. Yes, we would love to do that. So the reason this question came out is Aurora, the Kickstarter I did with Ghostfire Gaming for this post-apocalyptic world, is starting to be fulfilled. People are starting to get it around the globe, and so that's where this question came from about creating a setting. So there are many different ways you could do it. I will talk about it in as brief a time as I can while still being somewhat full. So what I do when I create a setting is first I would concept it in two ways. Think about why it's different than what's out there right now and what makes it stand out from everything that's out there right now. And the process that I used for Aurora started back when I was a kid. So this has been like, a 40-year process of things. The second thing I will say is when you're publishing something as opposed to just creating it for yourself, that throws many, many bits of sand into the gears. You have to account for so much that will end up changing the setting. And I'm not going to get into all of that at this time. When you're starting to create a setting, though, a lot of the process I used is discussed in a game called Microscope. Now, this game I've only known about for about 10 years. So yeah, I didn't use it when I was creating this, but many of the steps that you take when you're creating a setting are in this game. So this game gamifies a setting creation. Microscope doesn't account for the setting being used for games. So you would be more likely to use it if you were creating a setting. You could use it to create a setting for your games, but it's not going to cover everything that's in a game. So it might be more useful to create it for storytelling, fiction, and so on. But here's the process in a very brief list, what Microscope tells players to do. First, create a one-sentence description for your setting. That gives you something that you can constantly point back to when you're making decisions. For Aurora, it would be in a world ruled by dragons, what happens when the Draconic Society collapses as the dragons succumb to a rage-inducing disease? Boom. Everything is going to go back to that. What Microscope has you do next is create a period within the setting and put a period at one end where you will start and a period at the other end where you end. Now, this doesn't have to cover every time period in your setting, but it gives you bookends, they call, so you can focus everything between there. A period would be like in our thing, an era, maybe, the Enlightenment versus the technology revolution, and then everything else would fit in between. The third thing is to add a palette. What a palette is are things that you want to make sure are included in your setting, or things that you definitely do not want in your setting that would normally be there. So in a fantasy D&D type world, magic you would assume would be there. So you don't really need to say we need to make sure we include magic. Now, if you wanted to exclude magic, that would be something that you would put on your palette as a do not. With mine, it was Aurora, I don't want races. I don't want races mechanically. I don't even want races story-wise. So that's one thing on the palette that we're going to get rid of. What do I want? I want the world to be constantly in flux where there is no safe place. You have to create your own safe places. So there's not going to be towns, cities, and so on that are detailed and every square foot there. It's going to be open. When you get those things on your palette, you're then ready to do a first pass. So the players in this Microscope game will either create a new period in between these. So between the Dark Ages and the information revolution, we're going to have a renaissance. We are going to have, right? You can create a period or create an important event within a period that is already there. So these are things that are happening that are important within that period, that age. And that's where you start. And then you just go through and you create new periods, or you create events within these periods to fill out your world. And that's a great place to start. And I never realized it until I took this and I thought about the worlds that I'm used to playing in. Think about Dark Sun, right?
That's what I was thinking.
What's in the palette, what's out of the palette?
Yeah.
What's one of the periods? What's one of the things? So when I'm doing this in my class with students, I use stuff that they might know to say, okay, here's the world I built. These are the ages, these are the periods, these are events within them. You see how they fit. With Dark Sun, the Teos, I bet you could do a whole chart of ages and events and things that were important.
And I'm going to
stop and let you talk.
I'll butt in here to say that what hearing you go through this made me think of is, if I think of the various settings, I think some of them have done better than others because they have these things in mind, right? They didn't necessarily go through this process, right? But you can easily, in one sentence, describe what makes them unique. You can easily think through the eras and what they added to it, the major events and what happened and why it matters. And as an example, if you even take the Forgotten Realms, right? People will often say, like, well, what even is it? And it is hard to describe it. While there are big events, they often don't register. Their after effect isn't very clear, right? What the elves in Myth Draenor did doesn't exactly translate, or what the Netherese, you don't often feel it. It's just stuff that happened, a lot like a real world history where you can't easily dissect it. And the settings where it is really clear, those I think really stand out. It's not to say Forgotten Realms isn't a fun place to play. It is, but as settings, right? Settings stand out when they have these kinds of characteristics. That's cool. I loved hearing this.
Yeah. And with a game, then you need to also think about what that means for gameplay and the game experience that the DMs will. They're using this toolbox that you're going to create for your setting to tell great stories with the players. So you want to keep that in mind. So when I decided no races, then I had to say, okay, this is going to be a 5e game. So I need to account for that, not just in the story, but in everything game related. Race carries a huge weight in D&D. Both mechanically, you choose a race and you get a whole list of attributes and modifications and so on, but also story-wise, right? It's the elves versus the dwarves, it's the orcs versus the gnomes, it's this, it's that. And so when you divorce a game because of the setting from that, you need to replace it with something. And that's why we replaced races or species or heritages or whatever you want to call them, and created a system where those race delivered properties are given to you in a different manner. Because what you can say, oh, good, they got rid of races and replaced it with heritages, but it's still doing the same thing. It's saying you are from a group, and because whether it's genetically or culturally or spiritually, because you're in that group, you are the same as everybody else in the group. And I wanted to get rid of that mechanically and story-wise. And so that's what we did in Aurora. And because of the way the world was built, we had to think of the mechanics behind it.
That's cool. Neat.
Last question via Patreon Discord from Andy Demps. When converting older adventures, how much consideration do you think should be given to 5e's different rule sets and play culture? The standard advice is just swap the monsters for 5e equivalents, but encounter balance and pacing can be different. Character powers are wildly different. 5e can be used to emulate the play of older editions, but the play culture has expectations of more ability checks. It doesn't use dungeon exploration turns, reaction rolls, etc. And there's a huge difference in resource management. Should a good conversion account for that, or leave it up to the DM? Teos, I've been talking too much. You go.
Yeah, this is a really fun question, and someone else on the Discord asked, what would you do if you got the chance to redo Pharaoh? And I think you really, have to decide what your project is supposed to do, right? You have to think of it. You in these things, we always think about, well, what's the business of it, and how are you going to tap into the nostalgia, right? Are you doing like a yawning portal version of Pharaoh, or are you doing sort of more like the way Tomb of Horrors was used as inspiration for Tomb of Annihilation?
Mhm.
Those are two very different types of products, and it's important in these kinds of situations, if you are really in a company, you sit there and you workshop the benefits of these different paths, but you're kind of choosing one or the other, right? And so if Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh is such a good adventure that you can just swap in the monsters and the
Yep.
gameplay is largely the same. You
Mhm.
may realize, well, that monster doesn't work at the CR or whatever, and put something else in, but it generally, that experience of checking out this sinister house on the hill will work, and what you find below will work, and so it'll all kind of just work out by just swapping monsters, so that's fine. In
Yep.
other cases, you realize that specific situations, that swap won't work. Not only is it the wrong CR, but it's just the wrong feel. Maybe the monster felt different, or maybe the adventure in its old state, this was a bad spot in the adventure. And so we should change it. And I think that if you look at the Saltmarsh product, some of those Dungeon Magazine conversions don't do a lot of conversion and
Mhm.
probably should have, because
Yeah.
the experience is just kind of weak in certain areas. And it was weak back then, and it's
Yeah.
still weak in the 5e conversion product. And that's where I think that, well, we should have maybe looked at that and modernized it. A whole nother level beyond that is to say, if I want this product to be different, play off of those themes, but be different. The way Tomb of Horrors is not Tomb of Annihilation, but we can draw the lines to it. Then one can do that, right? And we could do that with Pharaoh. We could say, hey, the way we looked at Chult and reimagined it, how would we look at this Egyptian style world, and how would we change that up and make especially the start better, right? So that we
Mhm.
are so that it makes more sense for the player characters. And then how do we look at what's happening to the land where the water has been taken away, and the pharaoh and the ghost and the curse, and how do we weave a great story about that? And we probably want some pyramid experiences because that's pretty central to it, but how do we make those fit a modern era? And in that situation, we can look at entire levels of the dungeon and just chuck them out of the design because we don't care for them, or we have a better idea and we can just create a new version of that. And in that case, I think that's great to just take that approach to it. What do you think, Shawn?
I think a good example of what we're talking about is Tomb of Horrors. When we, Tomb of Horrors is always put in like the top 10 adventures of all times. Uh, when they did which we'll talk about in a second, the 50th anniversary of D&D, that was up there as, somebody's favorite module. Uh, it wasn't good. It wasn't good back then, and it's not good now. And it memorable?
Sure.
Absolutely. Was it deadly? For sure. When I ran it for a group back then, they had all heard that it was very deadly and everything was a trap. And so they survived, but they didn't do anything. And back then there weren't all these ability checks, as Andy mentions, right? So you're literally testing every 5 foot square with a pole, and you're throwing canaries into rooms, and you're doing these sorts of
Yeah.
things. And so in that sense, it worked for that era because based on the DM style and the player style, you could make that work. When you update that to fifth edition, what does that now require? It requires constant checks. It requires constant perception checks, investigation checks. There are practically no NPCs in there to interact with. There's very little um I don't know, there's very little
Yeah.
even combat. There's not a lot.
Right.
It's not the best adventure ever, not even in the top 50 for me.
Yeah, I've
And
run it in
yeah,
5e, and it using the Dungeon Magazine conversion, which came out during 4e, which is largely what
right.
it's 4e D&D next. It's largely what ended up in the Yawning Portal product, and
Yeah.
it. we went into it as for, especially for a couple of the players had never played it, right? And they wanted to experience it. And so we're like, well, let's just have this fun experience, make characters specifically for this, just enjoy the process. And,
Yep.
the reality was they hit a wall pretty early on, and they would not have kind of kept going had this been like a tournament adventure, or had they not known more about it as they did through the meta conversation. They would have been like, cool, we reached the end, we're done. And there was so much more. And so 2 different places we kind of just said, like, by the way, you find another thing. Okay. And we continue going on. And there were deaths, and there were classic deaths, the classic fun deaths that you can have in the adventure. We had a good time. Would we want to turn around and do another experience like it? No. It was fun, but it's not what you would want tons of, right? It's neat as a one-off different thing.
Yeah, and you well know the difference between a good adventure and an adventure that can be made good through tailoring and through managing expectation and changing things. So yeah. So I hope that answers Andy's question. Thank you for that, Andy. Thank you to everybody who has written in via YouTube, via Mastodon, via Patreon, or wherever else you hear us. Let's jump quickly then into our news and commentary to talk about the news that came out this week. And boy, was there a bit of it. We're going to start with D&D adding Ghostfire Gaming and Dungeon Dudes to the third-party D&D Beyond ecosystem.
What?
Grim Hollow Layers of Etheris is on sale right now, and Dungeons of Drakkenheim from the Dungeon Dudes is on pre-order for a December release. Were you surprised, Teos?
Surprised, Shawn? I would have been more surprised if I'd woken up with my head stapled to the carpet.
Mm-hmm. Is that good?
I think so.
Okay.
No, I mean, yeah, it was shocking because, I mean, we've seen Critical Role there, and we know there have been partnerships in the past with Critical Role, with AC Inc., but this was really a big move towards this third parties being on D&D Beyond. And there's a lot of questions with this as to what it means, right? It's amazing, I think, for Ghostfire, for Dungeon Dudes, who I met recently at Gamehold. Well, 2 incredible creators, super nice folks. I think for those entities, this is amazing, right? Being first is going to be fantastic. It's going to lead to a lot of sales, a lot of attention. And they have said, this was from a press release, with these 2 additions and more on the horizon, Dungeons & Dragons continues to invest in its talented partners in the aspiring creative community surrounding the world's greatest role-playing game. And I like that statement a lot. I'm not sure I don't want to say believe it, that sounds wrong, but because I think the person writing this believes this, but D&D has a terrible track record of working over time, long term, with partners well, right? It's why we end up with like Cold Press making a variant game. It's how we ended up with the OGL debacle. This is great. This is a good move forward. How it goes from here will be really interesting to see. Who else gets invited? How widely the net is cast? How will there be a time when anybody can publish? And there are all kinds of issues this brings up. Technical issues of you're the DM, and everything on the DM's Guild suddenly also is on D&D Beyond, or let's say that amount of content, and your players show up with completely wild builds that are some of them bad. Or can you not even find the official product? Because already if you bring that menu down, various really good books don't show up in that menu because you can't show everything on the menu. And right now we have, 2 slots with Critical Role and 2 slots with Dungeon Dudes and Grim Hollow. And then you have little things like this digital one-shot things that are being offering. And just the menu gets filled. And that may be bad even for D&D and for partners. So there's a lot here, Shawn. I'll shut up. But I'm trying to figure all this out in my brain because there's both so much potential and so many questions still remaining as to how it'll go.
Mm-hmm. I'll answer that in a second. I will want to also mention that Someone asked, what is Layers of Ethris? Uh, Layers of Ethris was when we did our Monster Grimoire monster book. One of the stretch goals was layers to put the monsters in. We funded that, so we were able to make this book with 20 layers covering levels 1 to 20, one for each level, using all new monsters, or all the layers are of new monsters that we used in the book. So if you buy Layers of Ethris on D&D Beyond, you'll get all of those layers, so 20 short adventures, 75 new monsters that are not only in the adventure, but also now in all the monsters that you could get on D&D Beyond. Some new magic items, some new feats. The feats, I believe, have to do with harvesting monster parts. In the monster book, we did a oh boy, I just went right out of my head. A salvage system where you can salvage parts of monsters and make things out of them. Potions, existing potions or new potions. So those magic items are things that you can make from the monsters that you kill. It's all there. And maps. We did 20 big poster maps for one for each layer. They're all there, and you can pull them down into the maps beta program or alpha, whatever they're calling it. You can use it there. All there, ready for you. To answer the question of, is this good? I have no idea. I have no idea if in the long run it's going to be good or not. Here's what I do know. I know that Wizards of the Coast cannot make every product that people want. So we need a good, rich third-party ecosystem to make those products that other people might enjoy, to keep the hobby growing, to keep everyone satisfied based on the diverse wants and needs of the player base. A company cannot survive unless they have access to the player base. And if players are moving to digital, whether Wizards does it or not, players are moving to digital. In order to have access to that player base, the third-party creators who want to remain a viable company need access to those people. So they need access to the place where those players are. Like it or not, that's where things are. Yeah. Having the ability to get content in front of the audience is huge. As a reference point, we are running a Kickstarter right now at Ghostfire. We had the initial wonderful 200,000, and then it goes down. And then if you know how Kickstarter works, it goes along in a very small clip for a while. And then you get to the end and there's a rise. Yep. U-shaped. So pledges go down, down, down. Pledges were down, down, down. This was announced. Our pledges went up. Just the fact that Wizards of the Coast placed a name in front of people has boosted that.
It's amazing.
That's the sort of boost we need across not just Ghostfire, not just the Dungeon Dudes, but for everyone who wants to make content.
Yeah,
and that's where this points us.
Most of us in the industry know that this does not hurt D&D at all. It helps D&D. As long as they can figure out the interface and things like that, it is good to have strong players in the system. And it is good for D&D to have good relationships with partners. And clearly it has a good relationship with Ghostfire. Wouldn't have started with them. So that's great. Obviously Critical Role was there, Ack Inc. was there, but this step was taken with Ghostfire, and it's indicative of the relationship the companies have, which is fantastic. We want more good relationships between Wizards and other companies. I agree with you. If I step back and I look at it, D&D Beyond wants to be the place where D&D players go to create characters and manage things and so on. And if it wants to be that way, it's going to either be closed or open. And closed would be a problem the bigger that D&D Beyond gets. So open is therefore better. How open, I think, is an interesting question, because if you get so open that you look like the DM's Guild, I think that presents some real challenges for the interface and for the experience that people would have. So we'll see how that goes. It's going to be interesting to see those steps. It's going to be interesting to see who else gets added, how quickly, and how that contributes to the experience. One thing for sure I want to see is that the modernization of D&D Beyond continues rather than stagnates, so that you see the ease of filtering, right? Like I want to be able to search and either look only at the layer of Atharis monsters or exclude them, right? I want to be able to do both things because they're great. And by the way, I gotta say, as your friend, congratulations, man, because you made Layer of Atharis, and this is so cool that it's on D&D Beyond. So pause and pinch yourself, Shawn.
Yeah, I have Greg Marks and Tom Donovan were the other creators of the layers. The monsters were created by a diverse team of 40 or 50 creators who created all the monsters. And being able to say, hey, that monster you created, it's now being seen by 1 million people as opposed to 1,000 or 2,000 people is it's so good to be able to lift up a creator like that, and show them what their hard work has brought them. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Other news, though, coming out of PAX was the 50-year panel, which we've mentioned, but we will go into a deeper thing. First thing was, like many people, I was subscribed to the channel, so I got a message on Thursday that the panel had started, even though it was meant to go Friday morning at Friday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So I, like many people, rushed to the site to see a sound check going on and a blank stage with just tables. Apparently they went live Thursday accidentally. No worries.
Funny.
They did start on Friday, and it went, I think, extremely well, with lots and lots of news. I'm going to let you start with some of your insights from it.
Yeah, so the first few things, there was a new golden logo for the 50th anniversary. Looks very cool and shiny. The panel started with a review, and it was Amanda Hammond who led the panel. It was Chris Perkins, it was Jeremy Crawford, it was James Wyatt. The panel started with a review of their favorite adventures across D&D history, from Radiant Citadel and Tyranny Dragons and 5e, to the typical things such as Shawn's favorite Tomb of Horrors, Tsojcanth, Tsojcanth, which had Chris Perkins. We were having fun, and I say this later in our notes, but I'll say it now. Shout out to the folks on our Patreon Discord, because we had a sort of live chat during this, and we were all laughing at the various pronunciations of things. And so Tsojcanth at some point was like Sojko or something. I forget how Chris Perkins said it. It was something really different than what everybody expected.
SoCon, I think.
SoCon, yeah, because somebody said, like, I really had a great time at that convention. And one of the few settings that got mentioned was the adventure Shadows of the Last War from the Eberron setting. And then finally, after all this, nostalgia time, they began to reveal the new products. You want to cover the first one, Shawn?
I would love to. The first is Descent into the Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth, Tsojcanth. This was an old adventure that has been updated. The cover, they had an awesome Bahir, and I was there, I was listening, and I'm still not quite sure what this is.
Yeah.
At first I thought it was just a one-shot adventure.
Or a remake of the adventure
that you could play. Right, a remake of the adventure. But then at one point they may have implied that it was going to be an anthology of one session short adventures.
Yeah.
It would make more sense to be that latter thing, an anthology of these adventures. But they did mention that they were going to re-add tournament scoring to these adventures. And if you don't know, in the chat, the main chat, people are like, what does that mean? Well, what they used to do was they'd run these at conventions, and you would get a score based on how much progress you made through the adventure. And then they would announce a winner, and the winner might get prizes. They have multi-round tournaments where you'd move on to the next round. And many of these old adventures that we hear about, Against the Giants and Tomb of Horrors, and a lot of these old adventures started out as these one-shots at conventions, these tournament adventures that they would then package and put out as an adventure module. Sometimes they'd leave the scoring in the adventure, so you could at home
Yeah.
get your score. Uh, so they're going back to that, which I think is interesting.
It's fun. I mean, I took a really deep look into tournament scoring when we were working on the D&D Open together, when we were bringing that back for
Mhm.
5e, because the WotC directive was, create scoring. And I looked at these old models, and it's really hilarious to look at them through a modern lens. So I'll be curious whether they really go off of what that used to be used, which we largely dumped for our D&D open scoring, or whether they're gonna, are they gonna modernize it or gonna go with the old version? I'm gonna be super curious to see that.
Mhm. So we will keep an eye not only on that tournament scoring, but on what this book actually is when we hear more about it. You want to talk about Vecna?
Yeah, Vecna's coming back. It so far haven't seen it be the Stranger Things version. It seems to be our Greyhawk foe. Vecna Eve of Ruin will be released May 12th, 2024, they said. And then take all these dates we mentioned with a grain of salt, because these were on images and then Wizards pulled the images. So maybe they're not quite ready to say those dates, but that was the original release date communicated, subject to change. And this adventure has been hinted at before. Now we get its proper title for the first time, Vecna Eve of Ruin. It is specifically made to be a 50th anniversary celebration adventure that takes characters to places tied to D&D's past. Vecna is from Greyhawk. There's a long tradition of porting Greyhawk's elements into the Forgotten Realms with no care whatsoever. So, are we fighting Vecna in Keeland? Are we fighting Vecna in the Amidio jungle? Are we, any of the many places that Vecna has been? No telling. We do know the
Mhm.
adventure will provide play up to level 20. And so it certainly sounds exciting. I hope it's as good as we all want it to be.
Mhm. Next, we heard about Quests from the Infinite Staircase, the release date being July of 2024, if the images that were pulled down are to be believed. This
Yep.
is like the other, a compilation of several adventures, perhaps even including previous adventures updated. The artwork was showing an Eldritch giant, said to be a new creature. So we'll see what that is.
Yeah, it
And
has
Teos
this.
points out in our notes here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I was just say, is this purple
Yeah.
skinned creature that to me the artwork looks a lot like an Eldritch Giant, which were big in 3E and also were in 4E. So we'll see.
Mhm. Yeah. And you also note in our show notes that Infinite Staircase was the name of a 1998 2E Planescape anthology. And the same year, there was an adventure for Duty and Deity that tied the Forgotten Realms to the Infinite Staircase. So the adventures could be run together in tandem. What
Yeah,
was
this.
the 2E version like?
So the idea was a staircase that ties, that starts. The root of it is actually in Isgard, in the domain of Saloon. You can tell this trivia to your friends. And from Saloon's home, in this kind of hidden root of the staircase, it spirals up and can look like any kind of weird staircase. Sky's the limit, so to speak. And it has
Mhm.
stops along the way, doorways along the staircase that lead anywhere. So it's yet another way to get all through the planes. And of course, it was part of a Planescape product too. So you can just think like, wait, I've got Sigil, the City of Doors, I've got the Infinite Staircase, I've got the Outlands, I've got spells. So many ways to travel. The Lilans were who watched over the staircase, and it was almost like a three-dimensional maze. And so just a creative fun house, right, where you can add anything both in the staircase itself and through the doors that they travel. So you can essentially think of this as a framework to tell whatever stories you want. Maybe they're multiplanar. Maybe this is what Jeremy Crawford says when he says, "Oh yeah, we'll give you more Planescape content or other content." Maybe it's because, well, you could say that this is Planescape to begin with, and you could add a door to any, to Eberron, and then say, "Look, we're supporting Eberron again." Okay, maybe. It's
Mhm.
I don't think it's quite what we mean, but it could still be really cool, and I'll look forward to seeing whether these are all new experiences or are they previous adventures that are modernized. It'll be very interesting to see.
Speaking of history, The making of the original Dungeons and Dragons, 1970 to 1976, is a product being released, we assume, in June of 2024. This is a historical look at the original D&D rules created by Gygax and Arneson, with arts and sketches from the creation of the original game. It was said that historian John Peterson was part of this project, and this will be 500 pages long. So the how many pages would you say the OD&D books were if you talk about normal size pages?
No.
50? Maybe?
Because they're little booklets, so less than that even, I think. But yeah, good question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. If you take all of it, like the original 3, it wouldn't even be 20.
Yeah, right.
If you expand out to some of the other, so this book will give you the history of that original game, and it's interesting having read all the histories and even heard first person accounts of Gygax and Arneson and they're working together, and then their rocky history, and it's fascinating on a sort of a drama llama level to hear about this from a historian who's deeply studied the era.
I'm glad John's involved. If John were not involved, I mean, I'm still worried about this, but I'm a lot less worried about whether this will be an accurate and fair portrayal, right? But having John on it gives it, I think that he would not want to sign his name off to something that's too slanted in one direction or the other. Because that history is really quite wild. So we'll see how this goes. But I know one thing, and that is I can't buy this book fast enough. The moment I can, I will get my hands on it. Love this stuff.
There you go. And we will be talking about it once it comes out too, I'm sure. And we got a core rules preview. If the images are to be believed, May 2024 may be the release date for the player's handbook. We got pictures and art and layout from several sections. The fighter class has a huge full-page art piece with the title, short description, amazing art. They shared the fighter subclass of the champion. They gave a spread of backgrounds, looking like a 2-page spread would have 4 backgrounds with it. And now we learn that backgrounds come with a little more mechanical weight than the backgrounds of the 2014 rules.
Yeah, and
what else did you notice from this?
I mean, I thought that was really, really interesting. And one is like, maybe they dressed this up as a layout to kind of show it off and they're just sort of testing it. But it's also possible, given the timing, that, they really are starting to just finish sections and put them into the finalized layout. And so looking at these backgrounds, I mean, there's a ton of stuff in the player's handbook that isn't in these, right? Backgrounds are actually something that's pretty meaty in the current player's handbook, and now we get 4 to a page instead of 1 and a bit to a page, and there are fewer words. There are none of those bonds, flaws, all that is gone. Those tables are all gone. It's just a very short mechanical bit, and maybe it gives you a language and a tool proficiency, and then a feat, and it gives you a 1-paragraph description, and we're done there. So that's very interesting. We shall see what we get.
Yeah. And they looked at art from the for the DMG. A mention was made again of a complete campaign setting being included. Mm-hmm. We will see what that is. Lots of art is being redone. The monster manual, they're going to have all new art and higher CR versions of monsters like oozes. CRs are not supposed to change. They've clarified in many different places. So the CR of a monster that's currently out there will not change, but the monster may change to update the math to put it at the CR level that it should be at.
I just want to get my hands on just a couple of example monsters. I mean, I think that will always drive me wild about this playtest process was that we may never get a playtest packet where we can actually play with all the pieces until the final version. but so it goes. And yeah, we for some reason we are getting stats for the characters from the '80s cartoon. And everybody keeps acting like this is the first time, but I've got the bulk of it in my DVD that has these. But you know, like we're gonna get these, and I don't know why. It's like, what if we just make a new cartoon instead? But I don't know. Yeah, it's a strange bit of nostalgia there.
Yep. And it was noted that we are again getting a release schedule that is quite rapid fire. 5 books at least between May and July of 2024. So that's 5 books in 3 months.
Yeah,
Uh,
and
that's a
maybe
lot for even the most diehard
yeah.
collector to keep up with.
But maybe they've realized that is in fact a little wild and they have stepped it back. I don't know, but well, they did pull all the images that had dates on them. I think it's also unclear, you know, whether that date for the core books of May 21st is that just for the player's handbooks. We'll see.
Mhm. One last bit of news because we're going a little bit over time here. D&D postage stamps. Say it with me. Yep. D&D postage stamps. Where you can't eat them, although you could try.
You can lick
But
them.
we're getting closer to. We can. Our you don't have to,
Yeah.
but you can. Uh, the nirvana of everything that branded D&D. We haven't gotten the sandwich meat yet, but we're still hoping postage stamps are a step in that direction.
Yeah, and I now have folks who ask me whether this is baloney levels, and this is better. You know, I mean, I still want to see a thing that's like
Yeah.
in everyday stores, the way that sandwich meat is, but this is in more than grocery stores. This is, you know, a necessity of people going and whether online or in their post office and seeing this as one of the forever options. That's super cool. 10 different stamps marking the 50th anniversary. We get an example of 10 of we get to see all 10. They're gorgeous. They come 20 to a sheet, and Greg Breeding, the art director for the United States Postal Service, designed them, and they just look amazing. You get Drizzt, and you get a gold dragon and Tiamat and various other just neat, you know, the cover of the red box, just awesome art there that it's, I mean, I can't wait to have that.